You're listening to Mechanic.com.au podcast, Australia's #1 podcast for automotive service and repair professionals. This week's podcast is proudly brought to you by Exedy, #1 for clutch. I'm your host, Jason O, and today we're joined by Chis Philp, who's the Sales and Operations Manager for Exedy Australia. How's your day going so far, Chris?
Good, thank you, Jason. Yep, just ticking along. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Sales and Operations Manager, mate, that's a big role. What does that entail over there at Exedy?
Okay, we based out of Victoria, here's our head office, so I look after sales for Victoria, Western Australia, South Australia, Tasmania and the South Pacific, and look after the logistics out of our warehouse.
Far out. And you're a car guy yourself?
Yeah, I'm a mechanic by trade, actually. I've spent my time rebuilding automatic transmissions for about 12 years, and now I sell clutch. So,
Are your hands still ingrained red with the transmission fluid?
No, they're okay now.
And
Moisturiser works well.
Any projects in the garage at home you're working on?
No, not at all.
No aspire, no aspirations to have anything on the weekend?
No, I used to have an old XY, which I loved, but moved on when I had kids.
Yeah, that's a common thing. We've had a couple of guys on that have said exactly the same thing, but goodness me, if you could have the XY back, it'd be money in the bank, wouldn't it?
Would be nice.
Well, listen, welcome to our listeners wherever you are listening to the show today. And, of course, today's topic is the Exedy clutch range and how to avoid the top installation issues. Let's go, Chris. Let's get straight into it. Tell us about the Exedy clutch range.
Okay, with the clutch range, we've got our OEM replacement, which is like our flagship product. It comes in our blue and silver box. So that's typical for just your standard replacement clutch. We also have our Sports Tough range, which is our heavy-duty option. Safari Tough is our 4x4 clutch package for serious four-wheel drive. Then we have Exedy Race, which is mainly track-driven vehicles. Devil Clutch for more street high performance. And then we have our Truck Tough, which is American and Japanese truck, and our Agri Tough range.
That's quite a good, broad spectrum of different driving conditions and vehicles you're attaching to. You're obviously constantly adding to that range?
We do. When a new item comes out, a new product comes out, we obviously for the OEM range is the most important, and then we look at ways if there's options to upgrade it to heavy duty based on customer demand.
Yeah, rightio. And obviously when you're using the heavy duty, the Safari Tough, the heavy duty button or the heavy duty cushion button, when are those to be chosen? When do you specifically know when's the right time or the wrong time to put those in?
A lot of that is based on what our customers' requirements are.
Okay.
How have they modified the vehicle or the engine? What sort of increase in torque have they gone and done to their car? And then in conjunction with us, they normally discuss, through a distributor, but they'll normally discuss what options are available for them and what the intended use is. So we can then tailor the best package for that range to suit their needs.
Yeah, okay. And obviously, Chris, you'd be able to scale up on performance as well. If you're choosing the right clutch application, you can say, well, look, this will do up to, 600 horsepower. You're only at the 300 mark.
Yeah, that's right.
Your clients give you that feedback?
They do, yeah. Sometimes they'll say this is, they've had it on a dyno and, they think they're going to get a fair increase in torque. They'll normally give us that, and then we base our recommendation on the torque figures they give us.
It's all about being boutique this day, isn't it, when you're choosing parts?
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah, there's no point us selling a standard clutch when they're going to, take it out and give it a hard time or tow heavy loads with it.
Because it only ends in tears, doesn't it?
That's exactly it.
Let's talk about, say, some of the top installation issues that you get from your customers. Some of the problems that you get coming back and how to avoid them.
Yeah, probably one of the biggest ones we have is incorrect installation of a concentric slave cylinder. Now, they're sort of not new now, but the slave cylinder is in between mechanics will know it, in between the gearbox and the clutch, and probably it's a personal thing. Most people, when they see something that's got a spring on it, they want to play around with it.
Yeah.
And these concentric slaves do have quite a sizable spring on it. So that's probably one of the things. Depressing that when it's dry by hand will, it could do some damage to the internal seals.
Okay.
So it's really important that they just sort of check it, get it out of the box and install it without playing with it.
Straight in. It's a very unique setup. If you've never seen one, which most people listening have, when you see one for the first time, they can be almost like a little bit of witchcraft, but they're quite a simple thing to install if you follow the instructions.
Correct. Yep, they are. Probably one other thing just to bear in mind with concentric slaves is when they install it, they really need to flush out the system as well, because any contamination in the fluid, say from a previous failure, could damage the new seals that are in the concentric slave. So it's always important to do that. And probably the most common question we get when people, certainly for the first time, are coming across the concentric slave cylinder is the bleeding procedure.
Yeah.
They really need to take their time and do it quite slow. It's not like bleeding a brake pedal. It's a very slow process they've got to go through just to try and get any air out of that system.
And I suppose you can take that time into consideration if you are at the workshop level and you're charging it out at an hourly rate. You know, you need to make sure you follow that procedure. And obviously the contamination comes from sometimes from clutch failures and so forth. Have you had any data come back as what the major failures are?
A couple of things with contamination. It's interesting. We supply in our kit a little grease tube that's to be used for the splines on the input shaft and also any release mechanism, so fork or pivot ball.
Right.
We still see at times them coming back covered in grease. So one thing we just try to
do a wheel bearing, lube a wheel bearing.
You laugh, but we do see that. They come back in terrible conditions. So, the little tube that we supply, that's the smallest we can make, and we sort of recommend only use half of it. It's just enough to put on the spline.
Less is more.
Make sure that the clutch, exactly, less is more, that the clutch slides on it properly and a little bit on your fork and pivot ball, and that's all you need.
Well, speaking of which, checking that release mechanism, that's a real critical part of the clutch mechanism. Why is that such an important piece?
Okay, well, with the clutch, you just think about a clutch system. It's just basically just a big clamp. Yeah. So a lot of the vehicles that are having clutches replaced and they've done, say over 150, 200,000 kilometres, there's wear on all that release mechanism. So whether it's hydraulics, master cylinder, the hydraulic lines could be wearing, or even simple things like a fork and pivot ball that could be wearing. They're little things you need to look at when installing a new clutch. But probably first of all, find out why it failed and if there's a reason for it, and then rectify those causes. There's a few kits that we supply with new forks in them because we've found that they wear over time and that will cause you issues when engaging and releasing.
We see, obviously a big rise in the four-wheel drive market as well, in the off-road market. And we see quite a few guys getting into, beaching scenarios and river scenarios. Do you have any issues with water contamination on these?
Not so much. Most bell housings are set up pretty well where not too much gets in there. If something gets submerged, then it doesn't matter what happens. That's going to always have trouble.
That's toast, yeah. Well, look, we know the flywheel just upstream a little bit plays a key role as well. Tell us a little bit more about why that's so important.
From flywheel, definitely. It certainly has to be machined when you're replacing a new clutch to make sure that the new friction material beds in nicely into that flywheel. But also probably one of the most important things is making sure if it does have a step on the flywheel that's followed. Yeah. On our website, all those steps and measurements are indicated for the vehicle. So Toyota, in his example, has a plus 0.5 mil step. So if you don't do that step, it will cause issues with the clutch engagement and disengagement or reduce the life of the clutch.
Right, okay. It's pretty important to stick to those manufacturer requirements when you are lining clutches up, because the feedback you get changing gears and shifting with the clutch, you just don't want that customer dissatisfaction, do you?
No, that's for sure, definitely. And it's when the clutch is out, it's very easy to quickly get the flywheel done before worrying about it afterwards after you put the gearbox and the clutch back in.
Well, speaking of which, you think about a clutch and the alignment. There's a lot that goes into getting it into the the bearing at the flywheel end. Tell us about misalignment, some of the issues that we can have there.
Yeah, you're right. With misalignment, certainly pilot bearings. So you've got to make sure that they're replaced if they have one. Not all have them these days, but the majority still do. Little things like burrs between the mating surface of the bell housing and the gearbox. At times it might not think much if make sure that the gearbox housing's clean and also the back of the engine block. And you might not think it's much, but sometimes if you exaggerate it, you can imagine if it's not perfectly aligned, what happens then is the clutch plate gets used as like a uni joint. So it actually starts using the clutch to roll around and will cause premature failure.
Yeah, right. And it can give you some pretty bad, gearbox issues as well. That input shaft can let go in a big way. Let's take a deviation, go slightly left of field. I want to head over to the wonderful world of motorsport across there. Talk to us about some of the range of products that you offer those guys on that side of the track.
For motorsport, it depends on what motorsport they're doing. So certainly drift and just sort of circuit stuff, that's where our HDB and HDCB comes in. But motorsport, as far as the high-end Exedy racing product, that's all, products that vehicles that are in Fast and the Furious and the like twins and triple plates, mainly for Japanese vehicles. And
the compounds for those clutches, do they differ from the traditional compounds?
A little bit. Some are carbon made now. Some of the clutch plates are carbon. And then there's also cerametallic, which is similar to what we use for our HDB or our HDCB.
Okay. And conventional clutch discs, essentially the fibre discs, can you give some of our listeners a little bit of a rundown on the difference between that and maybe a what we call a puck clutch?
Yep. So the fibre disc, the idea of the organic, we call it the organic clutch plate, is that's designed to give you, from an OE point of view, the best feel when the clutch is engaging and disengaging, and for longevity. So it's more about driver feel, whereas the puck style will give you an increase in clamp, but you do definitely lose drivability from it. It's pretty much anything that's button is, or certainly heavy duty button, is pretty much an on-off clutch, whereas the organic gives you that nice smooth feel for your city drive.
Yeah. And one of the questions I do have for you, and this comes from one of the earlier podcasts we did, we talked about vehicles that are coming into Australia in an import capacity and the requirement now to remove asbestos out of these vehicles. And I know a lot of guys listening to this podcast will encounter vehicles now and again that have to have this quarantine process done. Are you finding much requirements in regards to the materials in the clutches being changed over?
It was changed over a long time ago. We don't have any issue with asbestos anymore.
Excellent.
From an importing point of view, I can't really answer what's coming into the country from second-hand vehicles, but as far as our friction material, no, there's none of that. And
your range really covers anything that's coming into this country, really, from a vehicle point of view.
It does. If you're talking about Japanese imports, especially, which were big in and are still big in New Zealand, certainly we're a Japanese-owned company, so those products are all available to us.
Outstanding. Well, let's talk new technology and new vehicles that we have kicking around now. Have you got anything new and exciting that's sort of in the R&D works at the moment that you can tell us about?
That one's a curveball because that's more our product manager.
Yeah, and that's normally code for yes, I can, but no, I won't.
No, probably best you stay away from that one.
Well, let's also maybe talk very briefly about your network here in Australia and the customer numbers that you've got. What sort of customer numbers are you currently servicing here in Australia?
It's a wide range. We service specialists, so customers that sort of supply the trade, mainly brake and clutch and the like, but also the chains as well.
Outstanding. And obviously, your kits and so forth, you can break them down and you can buy the individual components if you want to. But the kits are still the number one seller for you guys?
Oh, definitely. Yep. Kits are the only way to go. Everything you need's there to do the job properly. Certainly, I know probably some of the challenges some workshops would have is customers trying to cut corners. But, if they're looking to just replace a clutch plate because that's worn out, it's generally something else that's caused it. The pressure plate may need to be replaced as well. So it's just not wise. But, yeah, it is our most popular. For sure.
Oh, that's the way to go. Well, look, thanks very much for coming on the show and chatting to us today, Chris. You've been a wealth of knowledge regarding clutches and everything else that hides behind the bell housing. Have you enjoyed it today?
Yeah, it's been good fun. Thanks, Jason.
Well, look, if our listeners have any follow-up questions about anything we've discussed, they can go ahead and reach out to Exedy via the Mechanic.com.au community. And if you're not already a member of Mechanic.com.au, join the thousands of other mechanics around Australia who are earning more, learning more, networking more at Mechanic.com.au, the online home of Australia's mechanics, by creating a free account today. Thanks for tuning into the Mechanic.com.au podcast, Australia's #1 podcast for automotive service and repair professionals. If you want to unlock a whole host of trade-only resources, including our private community, competitions, educational content, job opportunities, training, troubleshooting, and much, much more, go ahead and create a free account now at Mechanic.com.au. Thanks for listening. Keep dropping the clutch wherever you are, and we'll see you for the next podcast coming very soon.